Are you tired of this happening in your rank matches? Well, it's KJaws from KJaws Gaming here on TenkaichiT.O.P to show you an in-depth defensive guide for beginners and intermediate players alike. Today I'll be going over the various defensive mechanics in Sparking Zero and how to make the best use of them in a fight to gain the upper hand. I personally play on Classic, but I'll be showing both styles, and in addition we will be putting the needed inputs on the screen for each controller type. Before we dive into the mechanics, I recommend turning off most of the assist options as you gain more freedom in a fight. In the end though, it's whatever works best for you, but you should at least turn the guard assist off. Guard assist will mess up your counters because the game will prioritize the safer option in most scenarios, meaning it will block instead of countering, even if you execute your counter perfectly. Without further ado, let's get right into it so you can get to the hyperbolic time chamber and start training yourself to best all your foes. First, we will start with the utmost basic defensive mechanic, guarding. Most of you probably know this already, so feel free to use the timestamps in the description to skip ahead, but we'll go over it in depth for those who need or want the additional info. In Sparking Zero, you can press the guard button to block attacks from the front, but you cannot block back shots. Shots from behind. Pretty simple, right? Well, there's a little more to it than that. When you just block with no directional input, you get a neutral block. Like other Dragon Ball Arena games, you also have the high and low guards, which are very useful against attacks like heavy finishers. Be careful though, as using high and low guards can act as a double-edged sword. For example, if you do the wrong block, meaning you do a high block against a low move, it will leave you in a worse place compared to the neutral block, as shown in this example. As you can see, when you use the wrong block, you get punished and sent flying, which could lead into a free super attack from the opponent. However, when just using the neutral block, you get staggered and lose a bar of ki instead. The same interaction happens if you use a rush super into a guarding opponent. The game calls this a guard clash. Keep in mind that if you are low on ki, you can get guard crushed like so, leaving you defenseless. Next, we are going to talk about high speed evasion and Z counters. Both of these mechanics are very similar and actually use the same inputs, but they are slightly different. High-speed evasion can be used to dodge pretty much anything and is very useful to gain the advantage in a battle. For example, you can use high-speed evasion to dodge super attacks and launch a counter super yourself. Be mindful of your distance though, as if you are too far, the enemy will have time to recover and block. High-speed evasion is more advantageous compared to blocking, but it's trickier to pull off consistently. I recommend going into training to get the timing of it down. Here is a slowed down clip in case you wanted to see the timing better. As mentioned, Z counter is the same input of high speed, so what's the difference? Well, if you attempt to use high speed evasion during a follow-up attack, it will perform a Z counter instead. This means your character will do high speed evasion into a counter attack that will send the enemy flying. Be ready though, as your opponent can counter your Z counter with their own Z counter. This leads to very intense back and forth telefights. The person who wins will deal greater damage depending on how long the exchange is. Also, keep in mind that Z counter costs some ki while high speed evasion does not. Also, Z counter will always be used instead of high speed in a follow-up attack, so you don't have to really stress on the difference, as the game will automatically use the correct one depending on the situation, assuming you timed the input correctly. This example above stresses the difference between high speed evasion and Z counter. As you can see, the high speed evasion does not cost ki and puts you directly behind the enemy, while the Z counter costs ki and deploys an auto attacks, sending the enemy flying. If you are like me and don't want to stress too much on the difference, then I would keep these two mechanics bundled in your brain as they use the same input anyway. While we are on the topic of high speed evasion, I also want to gloss over high speed movement. This mechanic again is similar, however, it can be used both offensively and defensively. At certain points in your combo, you can press the above inputs to get a different angle on your opponent. This is very useful if the opponent manages to guard your combo or you want to give back shots. After high speed movement is executed, the other person can respond with their own high speed movement, costing about half a bar of ki, and this can go back and forth. This mechanic will not implement an auto attack like the Z counter, but instead puts you directly behind to open up a combo. Personally, I like to mix in a vanishing attack if I ever end up in a high speed movement battle, as it costs a little bit more ki and usually catches people off guard as they are in rhythm of reacting to high speed still. Vanishing attack is super strong offensively and defensively, but drains a lot of ki, so be mindful spamming it. I will go into more detail about Vanish attack in the offensive guide. but it would look similar to this in battle. Finally, let's talk about perception and super counter. In my opinion, super counter is the hardest to pull off consistently, but also the most versatile, making it super rewarding. First, let's go in depth on perception and its implications. Perception is a counter stance that when attacked, your character will do a counterattack. You can hold down the input to extend the stance duration at the cost of ki. If you time the perception counter stance, the moment your opponent attacks, you will activate Sonic Sway, a core mechanic in the previous titles. This move remains an extremely useful tool as it also drains your opponent's ki energy when activated. You can also activate Sonic Sway at any point in your opponent's combo if you are already guarding by timing the correct input. Perception can only be used to counter rush attacks. In order to counter other attacks, you need to use Super Perception. Super Perception costs 1 skill point and is used in place of normal perception depending on the opponent's attacks. Again, like the Z counter, you don't really have to worry as it'll automatically deploy the right perception depending on which attack your enemy is using. It's important to recognize which attack will activate Super Perception instead of normal perception to better manage your skill points. You can also use Super Perception to deflect Super Blast attacks if timed right. This costs 2 skill points instead, but gives you a temporary stat buff in exchange. From my experience, the buff is not worth using the 2 skill points, and this should be used as the last resort, as there are many other options to deal with the Super Blast attack. For example, you could use high speed evasion, you can dodge it with dragon rushes, use skills like wild sense, or just straight up block the attack. However, it is quite cool and is quite a flex as well. You can also use Super Perception to counter a revenge counter. A revenge counter is activated by pressing L1 or LB twice on classic or clicking the right stick in on standard after being attacked. A revenge counter costs 2 skill points to use as well. I personally don't use this as much as 2 skill points is steep. However, it can save you from death in some combos. Keep in mind that none of these techniques will work if you are taking hits from behind. This leads us to our final topic, super counter. If you're getting attacked from behind, also known as taking back shots, this is the only tool you can use to escape your opponent's onslaught. As mentioned earlier, super counters are harder to pull off due to the strict timing in order to do them. If you can master this mechanic though, you'll be a tier above fighters that don't have this in their shed. To execute the move, press the above inputs at the correct time. Super counters can only be used against melee or physical attacks and cost 0 ki, making them a very valuable tool. One important thing to note is that it is possible to Z counter a super counter if you react quick enough, like so. These next few points take with a grain of salt, as I need to do some more testing, but from what I can tell, it seems the super counter may go on a very quick and short cooldown if you miss the timing, making it unspammable. However, I have read online that some people are able to spam it and get the super counter off, but what I've noticed for me, this does not work even when I execute it perfectly. In addition, I do not think that you can super counter a super rush attack, though I'm unsure on that. If anyone knows, please let me know in the comments. The best way to practice this is under the attack break training option, as the attack is slower and easier to time. Once you can consistently do it, I would practice in the super counter training section where you can try against Piccolo's various strings. I recommend going into actual training against a balanced melee bot after to put everything together. Mastering these defensive tools will help you become a great fighter by giving you many options to control the match. Like most fighting games, a lot of the combat comes down to mental warfare and pattern recognition. Learning the pattern and what tools to use to gain the upper hand will come with combat experience. Conditioning your opponent to certain patterns and mixing it up for big punishment is also part of the mind game. If you learned something new or enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and subscribe so you can stay up to date with all the latest guides and Sparking Zero content along with your fellow Z fighters. Where we are working on more guides and other exciting stuff you won't want to miss. Feel free to join the TenkaichiT.O.P community. We'll be doing ranked matches, giveaways, tournaments, and challenges alike. Links in the description. Until next time, stay blessed, my fighters.